The moment you were born, it got risky. Jim Rohn, one of the greatest motivational teachers of our time, had a way of turning simple truths into profound lessons. Among his many powerful statements, one stands out with a deep resonance. The moment you were born, it got risky. At first glance, this quote might sound unusual. After all, what does risk have to do with simply being alive? But when we dig deeper, we realize that this statement captures the very essence of human existence. Life itself is risk. The moment you take your first breath, you are thrust into a world filled with uncertainty, opportunity, danger, and possibility. To live is to risk. Risk failure, rejection, pain, loss, but also to risk joy, love, success, and greatness. Without risk, there is no growth, no adventure, and no fulfillment. In this essay, let's break down the meaning of Jim Rohn's insight, explore why risk is inseparable from life, and uncover how embracing this reality can unlock personal transformation, resilience, and success. Life as the ultimate risk. The very act of being alive is risky. Think about it. No one is guaranteed safety, comfort, or even tomorrow. From the day you are born, you are vulnerable to illness, injury, loss, and failure. Yet this vulnerability is not something to fear. It is the foundation of the human experience. Jim Rohn often reminded people that if you want security, you'll never have it. The only place you can find absolute security is in a prison cell, and even then, you're not truly safe. The truth is that to live is to step into uncertainty. Every choice you make carries a consequence. Every dream you chase could end in failure. Every relationship you enter could end in heartbreak. But the absence of risk would mean the absence of life itself. Imagine a world without risk. No challenges, no adventures, no unknowns. It would be lifeless and empty. The beauty of life comes from not knowing what tomorrow holds, from daring to dream, and from having the courage to step into the unknown. Why people fear. Risk even though life itself is risky. Many people spend their days trying to minimize risk at all costs. They avoid opportunities because they fear failure. They stay in jobs they dislike because change feels uncertain. They don't pursue love because rejection seems unbearable. They don't start businesses, invest in ideas, or chase dreams because the possibility of losing feels more real than the possibility of winning. This fear of risk stems from a desire for comfort and security. Human beings crave stability, but the problem is that stability is an illusion. The economy changes, relationships evolve, health deteriorates, technology disrupts industries. No matter how much you plan, uncertainty remains. Jim Rohn believed that the reason most people never reach their true potential is because they try to avoid risk rather than embracing it. By avoiding risk, they avoid life. They settle for mediocrity instead of striving for greatness. The risk of doing nothing. Ironically, the biggest risk in life is not taking risks at all. By choosing safety, you risk missing out on your potential. By refusing to act, you risk living with regret. By hiding from challenges, you risk never discovering your true strength. Doing nothing feels safe in the short term, but in the long run, it costs far more. Consider the person who stays in a job they hate for decades, never risking the uncertainty of change. They may have a steady paycheck, but they sacrifice passion, joy, and fulfillment. Or think of the person who never starts a business because they're afraid of failure. They may avoid temporary loss, but they'll never experience the rewards of creating something meaningful. Jim Rohn warned against this trap when he said, "If you don't risk anything, you risk everything. Doing nothing may feel comfortable today, but it guarantees stagnation tomorrow. Life rewards those who dare." Every achievement requires risk. Every success story in history has one common ingredient: risk. Thomas Edison risked failure thousands of times before inventing the light bulb. The Wright brothers risked ridicule and even death in their pursuit of flight. Entrepreneurs risk financial ruin when starting a business. Artists risk rejection when they share their creations with the world. Leaders risk criticism every time they step forward to challenge the status quo. Greatness and risk are inseparable. You cannot achieve anything remarkable without stepping outside your comfort zone. Jim Rohn often said, "Don't wish it was easier, wish you were better." This means that instead of avoiding risk, we should strengthen ourselves to handle it. Success is not about eliminating risk, but about managing it, learning from it, and using it as fuel for growth. Risk is the pathway to growth. Risk is not just about danger, it is about opportunity. Every risk carries within it the possibility of failure, but it also carries the possibility of growth and transformation. When you risk starting a new career, you might fail, but you might also discover your passion. When you risk speaking in public, you might embarrass yourself, but you might also inspire thousands. When you risk starting a relationship, you might get hurt, but you might also find true love. Growth never comes from staying comfortable. It comes from stepping into the unknown, from facing fears, from daring to do what others won't. Risk is the price of progress. Jim Rohn believed that personal development is the key to handling risk better. The stronger you become, the more risk you can handle, and the more rewards you can achieve. Risk and responsibility. With risk comes responsibility. If life is inherently risky, then it is up to each of us to decide how we will face that risk. We can either let it paralyze us, or we can take ownership and use it as a stepping stone. Jim Rohn often emphasized the importance of self-responsibility. He said, "Don't wish for less problems. Wish for more skills." This statement aligns perfectly with the idea of risk. Problems and risks are unavoidable, but how we respond to them is within our control. If we grow stronger, wiser, and more disciplined, then we can handle risk with confidence rather than fear. Taking responsibility means not blaming circumstances, not waiting for luck, and not expecting someone else to rescue us. It means accepting that risk is part of the deal and preparing ourselves to navigate it. Seth. Risk in relationships and love. One of the most profound areas where risk shows up is in human relationships. To love is to risk. When you open your heart to someone, you risk being hurt. When you trust someone, you risk betrayal. When you build a family, you risk loss. But the alternative, living without love, trust, or connection, is far worse. Life without love may feel safer, but it is empty. The richness of human experience comes from the courage to risk vulnerability. Jim Rohn once said, "The walls we build around us to keep out the sadness also keep out the joy." This is a reminder that avoiding emotional risk also means avoiding the greatest rewards of life. Risk and failure. One of the biggest reasons people fear risk is the possibility of failure. But failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of the process. Every failure carries lessons, experience, and growth. Jim Rohn encouraged people to learn to manage disappointment. He believed that failure is not something to avoid, but something to embrace as a stepping stone. The more risks you take, the more failures you may encounter, but also the more wisdom you gain. Failure is not fatal. Quitting is. As long as you keep moving forward, every failure simply brings you closer to success. The willingness to risk failure is what separates winners from dreamers. Risk and wealth. Jim Rohn often linked risk to financial success. He believed that building wealth requires taking calculated risks, whether through entrepreneurship, investment, or career decisions, playing it safe financially, never investing, never starting a side business, never taking opportunities, may prevent losses, but it also prevents wealth. Inflation eats away at savings. Job security is never guaranteed. The only way to create financial independence is to step into risk intelligently. Of course, Jim Rohn didn't advocate reckless gambling. He emphasized discipline, strategy, and education. Smart risk-taking is what leads to wealth. Ignoring risk only leads to stagnation. 7. Risk and legacy. At the end of life, people rarely regret the risks they took. Instead, they regret the risks they avoided, the dreams they didn't pursue, the opportunities they missed, the adventures they never experienced. Jim Rohn reminded us that life is short and uncertain. Since risk is unavoidable, we might as well take risks that matter. If you're going to risk pursuing your dream. If you're going to risk building something meaningful. If you're going to risk living fully instead of merely existing. The ultimate question is not whether life is risky. It is what kind of risks you are willing to take. Will you risk mediocrity by doing nothing, or will you risk failure in the pursuit of greatness? One leads to regret, the other to legacy. Embracing the adventure. When Jim Rohn said, "The moment you were born, it got risky," he was inviting us to embrace life as an adventure. Instead of fearing risk, we should accept it as part of the journey. Every day is a chance to step into the unknown, to try something new, to grow, to create, to love, to build, to fail, and to rise again. Life is not meant to be safe. It is meant to be lived. And living means risking. When you understand this, risk stops being something to avoid and becomes something to embrace with courage, wisdom, and excitement.